Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition, and we turn now to poem number 365, Dare You See a Soul at the White Heat. And you'll notice that at the white heat is italicized in this poem. Now, this is a remarkable theodicy, as we will call it. That is to say, Emily will play the game of the blacksmith poet, using the example that many of her generation would know. Unfortunately today, guys, we don't always know exactly the power of the blacksmith with the fire and the forge and all of that. Some of us who live out here in Wyoming, we've seen this periodically, but it's an art form, unfortunately, we don't get to see very much. When this poem, by the way, was published in 1891 in the Atlantic Monthly, Thomas Higginson was putting together a collection of several talking about Emily's poetry. He called this poem The White Heat. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down the left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. And I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments where we talked about our big five in room 303. What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who we are, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally that fifth of the big five, what does this text say about pain, suffering in the world, and why must it happen? The fires of pain, if you will. And of course we call that theodicy, the question that is so significant to our study of Milton and Paradise Lost. I'm also hopeful that you've read our previous 364 poems in the Johnson edition. We just finished with 364 the morning after woe. And if you have, then you'll recognize that Emily is playing a game we've seen before, comparing, for example, poetic inspiration as fire, for example, as we have seen it. Now, it is true, many will read this poem, especially scholars, as another poem about poetic inspiration and the like. I think there's some powerful biblical passages that are standing behind this. Malachi 3:2-3, for he is like a refiner's fire, and he shall purify the sons of Levi. Or Colossians 3:9-10, the saved have, quote, put off the old man with his dead, and have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge. The idea of transformation through fire is, of course, a powerful motif, and we can think about the myth that Emily loves so much, the phoenix myth, right? The geriatric fowl or bird that will burn itself up in ashes, and then out of that will arise the new birth. She'll say it this way: Dare you see a soul at the white heat? Then crouch within the door. Red is the fire's common tent, but when the vivid ore has vanquished flame's conditions, it quivers from the forge without a color but the light of unanointed blaze. Least village has its blacksmith, whose anvil's even ring stands symbol for the finer forage that soundless tugs within, refining these impatient ores with hammer and with blaze, until the designated light repudiate the forge. Now, her use of the symbolism of fire and the power of the way in which when you heat up metal, or it becomes then malleable in some way. Notice we'll begin with the word dare, which appears in 35 of her poems, and right away it's a challenge, right? This is in many ways a challenge poem. Dare you see a soul? Now, soul is interesting. It ends up in 121 of her poems, as we said when we hit poem 139. Do you guys remember when we did 139? Soul, wilt thou toss again? By just such a hazard hundreds have lost indeed, but tens have won it all. Angel's breathless ballot lingers to record the imps in eager caucus raffle for my soul. So here, notice you want to see a soul at the white heat. By the way, when we get to poem 1151, we'll come back to this use of the word soul. Soul, take thy risk. With death to be were better than be not with thee. And then white will take us back to poem 271. It's almost as if Emily is asking or saying, if you dare to know what poetic inspiration looks like, then come inside here. Come within the door here, and I'll show you. But notice she uses the word crouch, which we saw in poem 11. When we get to poem 1304, we'll see it as well. Not with a club the heart is broken, nor with a stone, a whip so small you could not see it I've known, to lash the magic creature till it fell, yet that whip's name too noble than to tell. Magnanimous's bird by boy decried, singing unto the stone of which it died. Shame need not crouch in such an earth as our shame stand erect, the universe is ours. She'll use this again as well in poem 14:15. Crouch within the door. In other words, watch. In other words, look at what's going on. Watch how the soul is burned up so that it can then be used again, transformed in some way. So that in the end, to repudiate, that is to say, to transcend, to go beyond the use of the fire. Then she'll talk with the language of color, as we've seen so regularly. Red is the fire's common tint, but when the vivid, notice her word choices here, the vivid ore has vanquished flame's conditions, it quivers. I am in agreement with a number of scholars that believe this is the key word of this poem. Quivers, in other words, to feel a little bit fragile as one comes out of the fire from the forge. And of course, forge gets repeated, right? Notice the repetition of a number of the words in this poem. And we can't help but think of the crucible, right? Arthur Miller's play comes to mind, obviously. Without a color, but the light of unanointed blaze. That is to say, well, to be anointed is to be a chosen one. So, unanointed blaze. Anointed, by the way, will take us back to poem 232, you'll remember. The only other time it gets used. And then blaze, notice capitalized, which makes us think of poem 290 of bronze and blaze that we already danced with. So, her first opening observation is, there's two things at play. There's the forge where the fire is, and then there's whatever goes through the fire. And on the other side, comes out somehow different. And then she'll make an observation that the least village, in other words, everyone in every village has its blacksmith, again taking us back to Malachi 3:2-3 in the biblical tradition, whose anvil's even ring stands symbol for the finer forge. I think the stand symbol is the key here as well. In other words, she's using something that everyone sees. As we've said about Dante in our study there at learnstrong.net, we say about Emily, the most specific of poets and yet the most universal of poets as well. She'll say, everyone has seen this. Everyone has seen the imagery, the fire, the metal that goes into the fire that then can be somehow transformed by the blacksmiths. Many have seen this blacksmith as this symbol of deity itself, whose anvil's even ring stands symbol for the finer forge, right? The finer here, of course, is there's the forge that is physical, but then there's something far more deeply profound, spiritual, we might say, forge, that soundless tugs. You'll remember tugs from poem 77, I tug childish at my bars. Almost every time when Emily uses this word, tugging, it has more like childlike referencing, that soundless tugs within. In other words, she could be speaking of her own poetic inspiration, the muse that tugs from within. And then she'll go to the word refining, which is the key word possibly of the poem. Notice we go from refining to repudiate. Refining these impatient ores. It's hard because what she says, we want to whatever is going to happen for us, we want it to happen very quickly, and we would prefer for it not to be the suffering of the pain of fire. Yes, refining these impatient ores with hammer, right? The blows of life, if you will, and with blaze, again back to that word in poem 290, until the designated light repudiate the forge. Repudiate will take us to poem 641 and 1356, to go beyond. It's really the word transcend, and in that regards, Emily the Integralist will play the game of transcend and include. The only way that we ever become what we must become is to go through the fires and the hammer that will be associated with it. In other words, when pain and suffering happen, Emily will argue we must learn not to ask, why did this happen to me, but rather, why did this happen for me. There is some kind of designated in the end product. At 2b, not what she says, but how she says it. Well, the repetition here is remarkable, right? 2 times with or, 3 times with forge, 2 times with blaze, 2 times with light. As well, there's a number of alliterative and consonant sounds that come to mind. Notice, for example, in line 1, sea and soul, dare and door in lines 1 and 2, vivid and vanquished in lines 4, 5, flame and forage in lines 5, 6, light least in lines 7 and 9, blaze blacksmith in lines 8, 9, stand simple soundless, and for finer and forage in lines 11 and 12. And then here the consonants of white and heat in line 1. Red is fires, and within common tent, when vanquished conditions in lines 2 through 5. So Emily's playing a sound game here as well, which, if you'll think about it in the way that the poem can easily be read, with the hammering, that is a huge symbol of this. It's fascinating to read. At 3a, well, Longfellow had that famous poem, The Village Blacksmith, of 1840. And, you know, it's kind of interesting that the influence of Longfellow, no doubt, because he will often play the game for us. The Village Blacksmith, that poem will conclude with, quote, "Thus at the flaming forge of life our fortunes must be wrought, thus on its sounding anvil shaped each burning deed and thought." And of course, Longfellow playing a game that is quite ancient, right, to make malleable. I mean, I can't help but think of those lines from John Donne's Valediction Forbidding Morning, where he'll play a similar game, right? That is to say, our lives are constructed through the pain, the hammered gold, right? The Melville line comes to mind from Moby Dick, the fine hammered steel of woe. Or many have pointed out that maybe in Emily's mind is Milton's Lycidas, the final lines. But the fair guerdon when we hope to find and think to burst out into sudden blaze, comes the blind fury with the abhorred shears and slits the thin spun life. Finally, to own a poem like this at 3b, what was a time when you would say you went through the fire, you came out the other side, and you were transformed in some profound way for it? I hope your reading of Emily is doing that for you. Thank you.